Guys, I am here with Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran in London. And guys, this is going to be our first premiere video. We're going to upload this to YouTube as a premiere. And basically, the concept behind this video, for everyone that's tuning in, you should have the chat so you guys can talk to each other. You guys can send us super chats as well, and you can discuss the content of this video as we discuss amongst ourselves what's happening in the world. And today, the topic that we really want to tackle, and we're going to play it fast and loose, guys, kind of stream of consciousness debate and thought as to what's going on. We want to talk about all the events that are unfolding in Europe, especially with the Yellow Vest protest, with Brexit, with Italy. Me and Alexander, we've mentioned that Greece is a problem that also is not going away, it seems. We have Orban in Hungary, so we have a lot of, I don't want to say upheaval and unrest, but in Paris there is unrest.
I would.
Okay, there is unrest, Peter would. And we have a lot of things going on in Europe as once. So Peter, how do you see things? Sum things up for us. And Alexander as well. Guys, feel free, jump in.
Well, I saw your podcast with Alexander Mercouris about France right now. I mean, what I see very broad brush is that we see enormous disenfranchisement of people. The political parties, it's focused on France here, they're just not suited for public sentiments right now. And this president, Macron, is not in step with the sensibilities of what's going on in France. I mean, he's called the president of the rich for a reason, tax cuts for the rich, and then you have these fuel taxes on the middle class. Well, if part of your job is driving, you're getting hit really hard. And it shows that he's just out of step with the sentiments of people. And I'm not surprised that this fuel tax really ignited something. And there's a lot of bent up frustration. And you have this, this neoliberal president. He's not centrist at all. He's much more neoliberal than Sarkozy and Hollande. And he's even more out of touch. I mean, for such a kind of young schmuck, he's so arrogant. His arrogance is astounding to me. Based on what? I mean, he's compared himself to de Gaulle. He's no de Gaulle at all, okay? De Gaulle had gravitas, okay? Go ahead.
He's not de Gaulle. His policies are the opposite of de Gaulle's. Mm-hmm. De Gaulle was a patriot, a nationalist. He believed in a European community, not a union, of sovereign states. He took France out of NATO, out of the military structure of NATO. He pursued good policies with Russia. He was very opposed to interventionist wars around the world. He famously opposed the Vietnam War by the United States. So Macron is the diametric opposite of de Gaulle. Now, you said that he was the president of the rich. It's not just that he's the president of the rich. He is the Le Monde president. If you read Le Monde, his sentiments are exactly those of that section of French elite society. Very similar to the kind of people you get in Britain who read, who read and write for The Guardian, and that sort of culture. And of course, it's not the kind of culture that most people in France profonde, the small towns and cities, the industrial places, the people who have to actually get by every day, for whom life is getting harder and has been steadily getting harder, who see their welfare positions undermined, who see their efforts to set up businesses running into all kinds of problems. They don't really relate to this at all. And they feel that this is a president who is very remote from them. He also is, of course, anti-Catholic. And in a country like France, that doesn't go well with a lot of French people.
It's interesting. Here's the same president that said there was no such thing as French culture. I mean, during these neoliberal times, it's your culture. That's what you need to have a sense of sanity about what's going on around you. And now they're taking their culture away from them. This is disastrous here. But as I've said before, and I'm going to agree with Alexander Mercouris, I mean, if it doesn't affect your zip code, then, these thuggish people, they just don't know what to do with themselves. but they know exactly what they want, and the political system and the ideology that is imposed upon them doesn't fit their needs. And this is why this kind of thing happens. This is going to happen, continue to happen. This is not a one-off. And the appetite comes with eating, okay? Macron has got a temporary stay of execution here, okay? This thing is going to unravel and continue to, and I think it's going to have a demonstration effect across the European Union.
I don't think the protesters bought it, though, did they? I mean, from what I understand, they're going to continue protesting. The part that pisses me off about this is that he just hinted at a 6-month hiatus. He's going to put this on hold for 6 months, but that doesn't say much. They could reintroduce this again in 6 months.
It doesn't say anything. My impression is, if anything, that the disaffection is spreading, and the fact that he's retreated slightly actually gives people a sense that there's blood in the water now. They see Macron no longer as this unstoppable force that he seemed to be a few months ago. And in fact, doing it for just 6 months, again, I think is provoking in some ways, because it says, well, I don't agree with you. You're protesting all over the place. I don't really see that you have any point to what you're doing. But because I've got all these protests and because I got this problem to run, I'm going to put it off for 6 months and then I'm going to bring it back. And I think a lot of people are going to be very angry with that reaction. I think instead of going out and explaining to French people how this is going to perhaps benefit them, he doesn't really do that either. And he doesn't understand rural France. He doesn't understand how important it is in a place like, last year I was in the department of the Lot in a town called Figeac. He doesn't understand how important it is to have a car there. And of course, if you have a car in France and you have been persuaded over many years to go over to diesel because that was supposed to be the carbon-friendly thing, and now you're told that actually diesel isn't environmentally friendly at all, and you're going to be taxed up to your ears for having a diesel car, which it was the government that incited you to buy, well, you're going to be furious.
No, the thing is that this is not about this fuel tax. It's not. This is about something much, much larger. Okay, well, there is no engagement here of trying to understand how the average person feels, the stresses they're under, the problems they have. This is a systemic problem. It's not one single tax problem. Not at all.
As they did with migration, Peter, correct? As they did, they slow walk the. They don't talk to the people. They don't ask them. Did Merkel ask anybody? Hey, we bombed the crap out of these countries. We bombed the crap out of them. Now do you guys want to host them?
That's exactly right. Okay, this privileged class of people believe they believe that they're inspired by a higher cause to be able to know how to social engineer the coming utopia. Well, they're all flat wrong, okay? I don't care what country you go to, okay? This utopianism is a disaster for the average person. And it's finally, they should start waking up to this, okay? Don't take people's culture away from them. Don't take away their traditions. Don't change the demographics at a whim. 1 million people, come on in. No way. That is very destabilizing. We've seen how Merkel has been taken down election after election after election. That's her punishment, okay? Macron, the way he's going right now, maybe this is too much hyperbole, but I don't see him finishing out his term. I mean, he's really taken a real strike here. What we're going to find out is if the guy has any learning curve at all. I mean, then he goes to Poland and he's talking about global warming, okay? When the issue is not even discussed with his own people.
Well, indeed. And I mean, it's exactly what you say, because as I said, he's more interested in talking to that small group of people who read Le Monde and newspapers like this, than to the mass of rural France. But the great problem is that the political system which produced Macron is not changing. It is very difficult to see in France how anybody who takes over from Macron, from the existing system, is going to be very different. Now, when you take away from people that opportunity to change their government, to actually change, to achieve real change through the ballot box, they start going into, they start rioting, they start seeking change in other ways.
Of course.
And that is exactly what you see in France. It comes back to that point you made right at the beginning about disenfranchisement. These people feel disenfranchised.
Alexander,
Get their own people in parliament, in power, and they don't actually do what they want when they elect them. Carry on.
Alexander, did the UK not do the same thing? Did Theresa May not do the same thing? People went to the ballot box. They voted for Brexit, 17 million people. And May, much like Macron and much like Merkel, she started to slow walk this referendum. She started to make excuses. And now you have the UK in the position it's in today because she just didn't simply follow the will of the people. Is that true or not true?
That is exactly correct. And of course, it's the people who are protesting against Macron. It's the same sort of people who voted for Brexit in Britain and just disregarding what they say, talking about, how they were deluded and tricked into voting in certain ways and completely reversing what they voted for, I think is politically incendiary. Now, Britain is a more orderly country than France, but I mean, it's not that much more orderly. I can very easily see going, a few years down the line, we could be facing the same kind of crisis in Britain that we see in France. And of course, there's already a political crisis festering in Britain as we speak, because, again, the political system, and let's remember, during the last election last year, both political parties committed themselves to Brexit. And, they're drifting away from that, drifting away from the referendum outcome. And I can easily see protests in Britain taking off in a similar way to the way that's happened in France. And it's a mistake to think that doesn't happen in Britain too.
One of the things that I found really fascinating in looking at some of the video from the streets of Paris is the ubiquitous display of the French flag. And that's something I haven't seen for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
This is really a call for re-sovereigntizing the country, okay? To what level of consciousness of that, because I'm not there, but from what I can see here. I mean, you usually don't, when you see these kinds of things, it's usually from the left and it's a red flag or the anarchist flag. This was the tricolor, and I was impressed by that.
Yes, I think it's a very important point to understand about France. France is different from other countries in the sense that in France, traditionally, the forces that embody nationalism have been left-wing. Yeah. This goes all the way back to the French Revolution, when, as I said, the French Revolution, it was conscription, it was the patrie is in danger. The French people rally to protect France, to protect the revolution, and the tricolour, let us always remember, was the French revolutionary flag. Yeah. So, he is, to some extent, because he pretends to come from a kind of centre-left position. It is a centre-left position which very few people in France would recognise. But the French people, if you spend any time with them, they have always been exceptionally proud of their culture, of their history, of their specific identity. And in a world where more and more people talk English, where global institutions are dominated by the United States and by the English-speaking world, it makes the French even more possessive in some ways about their culture. So to see the president of France standing up and saying, that nationalism is a bad thing, that France must be submerged in this Europe, that the solution to all these problems is more Europe, that the French army should be replaced by a European army. All of this is extremely disturbing for many people in France.
And on the flip side, you have, leaders like Salvini in Italy or Orban in Hungary or in Poland, where they're speaking about a nation statism, a sovereignty, and the European Union is trying to take them down. What do you think of that, Peter? I mean, you have on the other side, these are people that are saying we want our sovereignty, and the EU is sanctioning them. They're trying to get them removed. They're calling them fascists. All kinds of things.
Yeah, well, it's the quintessential Hotel California. Once you check in, you can never check out. Okay, you're there, and you've just given the keys to the kingdom to some faceless, well-paid and pampered bureaucrat somewhere. Brussels, take your pick. Okay. So this is what is dawning on a lot of people. The promise was prosperity and security. That was the deal. Okay, they didn't realize what you're going to have to pay for those two, and on top of it, you're not getting either peace and prosperity. I mean, this is lose all the way around. Except for if you're in the right zip code, then everything is fine. Let them eat cake, okay? And this is what Macron has done is thrown crumbs, okay? They just can't grasp because they're ideologically possessed that they are creating a better future with creating a new person, okay? They absolutely believe in it. I lived in Eastern Europe for many, many years. Their nationalism is very close to what Alexander Mercouris was talking about. They're proud people from small countries that have had a very turbulent history. And when things get tough, they fall back on their traditions. But one by one, their traditions are being taken away from them. And they have nothing left. Okay? And this is what's happening across in different ways with different dynamics. But there's a root problem here, and they're all reacting to it in a different way. And I do think that people tend to fall back on culture, tradition, and religion. Okay, the civic institutions are not enough to bind a European-wide society together. I'm convinced of it. Okay, it doesn't work.
Well, what do you make, Alexander? I also want you to respond to Peter, but what do you make, Alexander, of the fact that many people say Merkel is behind the UN agreement, the UN compact to one, I think, criminalize, make it hate speech if you talk about migration, and then to make migration more accessible worldwide? How is that all connected?
It could very well be connected, and it might indeed originate with Merkel. But let's not just make Merkel the only person, because, of course, this is very much a policy, or rather an attitude. Let's call it an attitude, rather, that has become very, very ubiquitous within Western elites. That, as I said, they want to basically restrict freedom of speech, because when we talk about hate speech, I mean, there is hate speech, which is, abusive speech directed at individuals, which is a form of harassment, and harassment can be a criminal offense, and I understand that. But a lot of hate speech is simply people policing speech. It is making it more and more difficult for people to express opinions, and those opinions, in effect, the expression of those opinions is becoming outlawed. What we are seeing is this supposedly liberal order, they call it the liberal order, it is becoming increasingly authoritarian. It is becoming, in effect, illiberal, and it is enforcing its views on other people. If we go back to France, it is the opposite of what one of the great father figures of liberalism, Voltaire, is supposed to have said. That I may completely disagree with your opinion, but I will fight to the death to enable you to say it. We're seeing, as I said, this trend being enforced right across Europe, and people who have different opinions, Kaczynski in Poland, Orban in Hungary, Salvini in Italy, they're called fascists, they're called the authoritarians. They are not the people who are promoting authoritarianism, it seems to me. It is the European structures, it is the elite. They, it seems to me, are doing it through these very, very dangerous mechanisms that we've been talking about.
The thing is that, criminalizing speech, particularly when it comes to immigration, what that means, what that equals to at the end of the day is that immigration is no longer allowed to be a political topic. That's what they want.
Well, exactly. And can I come
to a political topic? And if it's not a political topic, then you don't talk about it, okay? This is such a dangerous slope to go down, all right? Because then all of us will end up being dissidents, okay? All of us. And there will be no speech at all. Yes. And I've lived in a society where there was no freedom of speech. I lived in communist Eastern Europe, and I know what that is like, okay? And it's very dangerous. And what they're doing in the West is they're doing it through liberalism. Wrap your head around that.
Well, as I said, it's not liberalism. However that term is defined. I mean, if we come back to immigration, of course, General de Gaulle was opposed to immigration. You can find all kinds of speeches.
The left traditionally was against immigration. The loudest voices against immigration historically is from the left. Okay.
Exactly. If you go back and read de Gaulle's speeches today, he would be called a fascist for some of the things he says in them. And this is, of course, the man who stood up to actual fascism during the Second World War and who led France's campaign against Hitler. So, I mean, it's again, it is turning history on its head, turning reality on its head. And as I said, we should be extremely careful when people go about banning expression of opinions and calling them hate speech when you see what they're really doing. And can I just say something else? I mean, the other thing, and we can talk about this perhaps more some other time, though I know it's a subject that will interest you, Peter, as a former historian, is these attempts to use the law to legislate history, to try and say, certain, opinions about history should not be printed or not be published, and to make that, and to impose legal penalties if you write history in a certain way. Now, I find that particularly dangerous and exceptionally Orwellian, because history is obviously my original subject. And it is one that concerns me enormously because, of course, it all started with Holocaust denial. And now it's spreading to all sorts of things. So it seems that in some countries now it's becoming mandatory to say certain things about historical events, which many, many people might disagree with and might legitimately disagree with. And of course, if you can't talk about history, you can't debate history freely, what can you debate?
Exactly. I mean, the case study, the most glaring case study right now is in Ukraine, where they're completely rewriting history. And very, very dangerous. And who's watching from the sidelines and aiding and abetting? The European Union, the United States will not say a word about it. It's very, very dangerous. Okay,
they're cheering it on. They're cheering it on. I mean, they are, as you correctly said, they're rewriting history. They're inventing a completely different history from the one that existed before, and they're enforcing it. I mean, they're making it extremely dangerous for anybody. Well, in Ukraine, it's becoming illegal, but it's not just illegal in Ukraine. It is becoming very difficult now, even in the academic world, to argue against these things because it is so politically dangerous. And if you're an academic, if you're a historian, you have to start taking these things into account if you are to retain your position, if you are to retain tenure. So history is becoming an increasingly remote subject for many, many people.
The interesting thing is that historical writing is leaving the universities. It's leaving the academy. It's going private. Okay, it's going on YouTube. Okay, I mean, because you cannot say things in these institutions because there are too many taboos. You can lose your job, or you won't get a job at all. So really, again, it goes like full circle. I mean, we had the universities, so we had a sacred, dignified, professional place to talk about these ideas. Now they've been all corrupted, and now real academic work, real academic thinking is outside the university.
But of course, the problem with doing it that way is that, of course, if you start taking it out of universities and allowing a kind of free market of ideas and history, you risk losing some academic rigor that
Because what you need is peer review, okay? And it's like all this these transgender theories and all that. I mean, none of it's peer reviewed. It's all junk, okay? Nothing proven, okay? So you get the worst. You get the worst of all possible worlds that way.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's all about feelings. All about feelings, not facts.
Well, I always say, feel free to offend me. I like it. Okay, it makes me think.
And as an academic subject now in universities, history is becoming increasingly esoteric because these are the
it's ridiculous.
It's safe to write about. So, you don't write about the big things, you write about the small ones.
I was in academia 25 years ago, and it was bad then. I can't imagine what it would be like being within it now.
They wouldn't allow you in it. No.
I don't even think they'd let me walk across the university campus now.
Yeah, you wouldn't last a minute. That's for sure. But guys, let's wrap it up. This is our first premiere, and it was really, really great topic, and the discussion was really good. Where do you see things going? If you had to take us, where do you see all this stuff heading to?
Well, I think what Peter said about Hotel California. Well, we saw it in Greece. The people of Greece voted a certain way, first in an election when they elected Syriza, then with the referendum. And of course, they got exactly the same outcome that the European Union wanted. We're seeing something like that starting to happen in Britain. We're seeing the pressures in France. Now, you cannot screw this down indefinitely. The pressure cooker is going to continue to intensify. And I'm afraid I'm beginning to wonder whether or not reform is actually possible anymore. I think we are heading towards a complete breakdown. I'm not sure how long that will take. I'm always very careful and cautious about talking about revolutionary scenarios because they are so rare. And may I stress, in some ways, I don't like revolutionary scenarios anymore. But as I said, if this continues in the way that it's going, I could see that we could very well and very easily head that way. And in the meantime, we will have growing instability and growing political polarization. There is a very, very sad article, very interesting article, by a British writer called Max Hastings in the Times, the London Times today, in which he makes the point that for the first time in Britain, because of the way that Brexit has been mismanaged, people in Britain, old friends, are no longer speaking to each other. That there is that degree of polarization in this famously polite society. People are no longer able to speak to each other. They can't even they can't meet in neutral places. There is argument, there is quarrel, there is growing anger, and there's growing instability as well.
Well, I'll just end off on this. I actually like the song Hotel California by the Eagles. I just don't like how it's composed and sung in the European Union.
There you go. Guys, thank you for joining us on this first premiere chat between Peter Lavelle, Alexander Mercouris, and myself, Alex Christoforou. Thank you very much, guys. We're really interested to see the chats that you guys will be posting as this video goes, premieres to all of you live. So we're interested to see your feedback. And of course, tell us what you think of this video in the comments down below. Buy a t-shirt as well from the Duran shop, 20% off all through December. So buy a t-shirt, give a t-shirt as a gift. And of course, in the description box, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon pages. Please donate to the Duran. And this premiere will also go on iTunes and on Soundcloud, so you can download this in the audio podcast version as well. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk from Moscow, thank you very much. And Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran from London, thank you very much. Take care, everybody.